Hello, I'm Cameron Paxton, and I'm the composer for Dome Keeper. Today I'm going to be dissecting my track Laser Party from the Dome Keeper soundtrack, going over the processes and tools that I used in creating the track and the philosophy behind the entire soundtrack. The track Laser Party was actually written pretty early on, when it was still called Dome Romantic, so it kind of retains some of the characteristics of the first few tracks that I composed before the graphics got updated. You can still play Dome Romantic, by the way, on itch.io. It's still free to play and has some of the old mixes of a few of the tracks in there. So as you can see, my digital audio workspace of choice is Ableton. It's what I'm most comfortable with. I've been using it for many years. And I also compose primarily on a Ableton Push 2. It's a very easy MIDI controller for a guitar player to pick up because the chord shapes are the same. And I use a lot of VSTs, but there are a handful that I use consistently. Pigments was the synthesizer that I used for Dome Keeper. It's very flexible. You can make a lot of cool sounds with it. Basically, the entire soundtrack was made using Pigments. I use a handful of saturators. Halcyon is my main one. It goes on basically everything, and it's a great way to kind of accentuate certain frequency ranges. If you don't want to try to fiddle with EQ too much, it's a great way to just make something sound nice quickly. Tape is another good one. It's tape simulator. It has some drive and saturation in it, but it also has this wear knob, which is a really nice feature. Kind of makes things sound old and like they're falling apart, which is a big aesthetic choice that I made for the Dome Keeper soundtrack. It's all kind of, it sounds like it's barely working and kind of on its way out. Similarly, RC20 Retro Color does a lot of the same things. The wobble and magnetic knobs kind of give it that old tape reel being stretched and getting older type feeling. And then Valhalla, Vintage Verb, and Delay. I use these on everything, even other stuff that isn't game related. It's on my project template. I have it as my send tracks for my reverb and delay. And yeah, that's about it for the ones that I use on everything. The original Laser Party is pretty similar to what ended up in the final game, but it's not as dynamic. It kind of just gets where it's going pretty quickly and just kind of stays there throughout the whole track. It never really gets to that higher energy place that the final version does. It just kind of gets here on this section in loops. So that's the version that I composed for Dome Romantic. And so you'll hear a lot of that same stuff in the final version as well. The main beat. So I was going for a kind of old school hardware sound when I made a lot of these old tracks. So I used a lot of bit crushing and compression and kind of EQing certain frequencies out. So you can hear that I've got Decimort is the bit crusher that I prefer to put on things. You can hear when I take this off, has a lot more of a natural drum sound to it. So a lot of that texture and feeling comes from the bit crushing. So in this version, I added in another layer of drums to kind of give it a little more energy and a little more of dynamic variation that the original track did not have. So here you can hear where I'm using some RC20 to just kind of give it a little more texture and wear it out a little bit. For the bass sound, I really just wanted to accentuate the drum pattern. So it's really just highlighting the drums, the kick and the snare. I think there's probably not a whole lot to say about the bass, except for there's this interesting bit here where the bass turns into a little instrument solo. So I think what maybe a normal person would do is have a separate track where they treat this as a solo instrument. My tactic was to just do all these silly automation tricks and to get it to sound different instead of just moving it to another track like a smart person would do. But, you know, we've all got our quirks. And then the main loop here is just the bit that plays at the very beginning. It's what I think probably makes the track instantly recognizable to anyone who's played the game. And it just kind of follows this sequence. It doesn't really change much throughout the track. There are some parts where it cuts out to let some other instruments come in and add a little bit of variation. So I did try to get away from the bit crushing when we switched from Dome Romantic to Dome Keeper. The graphics were updated to make it more high res. The whole thing, it kind of stopped feeling like an old school game at that point, and I wanted to have more high fidelity sounds. So if you listen to the old Dome Romantic soundtrack, which you can find on my Bandcamp, it's definitely more lo-fi sounding. And so this track still keeps some of those elements, just it worked really well for this track in particular. And there's this part that adds, you know, a little more texture variation and isn't as rhythmic as the rest of the stuff. Yeah, just add a nice little melody over top and keep it from getting too repetitive. And this is one where there's a little bit of bit crushing going on this one as well. But again, it's really subtle. It mostly just adds volume, but there's a little bit of texture there too. So most of what's going on in this one is happening within the synthesizer. It's not effects that I put on top of it after. But yeah, so getting to the new bits of the track that were composed specifically for Dome Keeper. More rhythmic stuff to kind of add to that energy. And pick up, you know, just kind of lift the whole thing a bit more and make it more celebratory. And then I have this that just fills it out a little more. It's basically copying the exact same thing. It's just slightly bigger sound synthesizer that I sunk in the background a little bit. And then there's the buzz. Yeah, more just kind of rhythmic elements to kind of contrast with the syncopated with the drums a bit. Yeah, just one additional layer on top of this kind of it's doing some slightly different things than the other instrument, but it's basically the same. And so for the original version, this is where it just cut out and went straight to bass, but for this version I added this kind of that little solo instrument over top of it. Brought back in the main loop again, and then kind of started automating in some reverb and delay to kind of build up. You can see it's starting to build up here, just to raise the tension a little bit and cut it out, and then back into the track again. So that's where it loops. So as long as you're sitting there reading your stats and enjoying the glow of victory, it'll just keep looping. That's about it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you were able to learn something and enjoy the rest of the show.